Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Here on Generation Tech and on our second channel, Generation Films, we like looking at the work of other artists and breaking it down and criticizing it because it's easy to do and takes very little skill. Now occasionally, and I mean occasionally, we do manage to propose some solutions to fix the problems that we point out, and that's what we're going to do today by looking at The Last Jedi. Now there's one scene that I think a lot of hardcore Star Wars fans picked up on, and just in general nerdy individuals like me or you have probably picked up on. And that's the scene where Admiral Holdo takes the Resistance one remaining Mon Cala cruiser and slams it into the First Order flagship Supremacy at hyperspace speeds and basically takes out every ship in the enemy fleet. While this is probably one of the coolest moments cinematically in The Last Jedi, it kind of completely breaks how Star Wars combat works. Now, prior to this scene, there have been very few cases where pilots have either inadvertently or purposely used the hyperdrive as a weapon. In canon, Anakin Skywalker boarded the Separatist flagship Malevolence and sabotaged the nav computer so that the next time the crew engaged the hyperdrive, it would fly directly into a nearby moon. And that's exactly what happened. The problem with how the new canon treats hyperdrives is that it makes it very easy for someone to use the hyperdrive as a weapon. As a matter of fact, in a video we published before The Last Jedi even came out, we talked about this. We were like, well, eventually someone is going to figure out that these hyperdrives will be the ultimate weapon to destroy anything, including even a Death Star or Starkiller base. Because weaponized hyperdrives are an obvious choice, especially when you're completely outgunned and outnumbered like the Resistance was or the Rebellion before it. So why did the franchise wait so long to use the hyperdrive as a weapon? Well, prior to the Disney takeover, all hyperdrives had an automatic failsafe, which brought the ship out of hyperspace when a gravity well was detected in front of the ship. By gravity well, I mean any mass large enough to have significant gravity, like a moon or a black hole. These failsafe devices were hardwired to the hyperdrive and relatively difficult to remove unless you knew exactly what you were doing. So if you're trying to pull off something like what Admiral Holdo did, you probably need an entire team of engineers and a considerable amount of time to prepare the hyperdrive for this maneuver. This failsafe, although not technically canon anymore, is also tied to a piece of canon technology introduced in Rebels, which is the interdictor. Interdictors were a specific type of ship that generated a massive artificial gravity well, which would trigger the failsafe on Starship hyperdrives, pulling them out of hyperspace and trapping them in real space. Thrawn effectively used this technology to keep an entire Rebel fleet trapped over Chopper Base. Thrawn is a character created by Timothy Zahn, who was really one of the first people to introduce this idea of gravity well generators and interdictors to Star Wars. So if the interdictors are canon now and they're very similar to the ones in Legends, that also means it's very possible that hyperdrives in this version of the galaxy will have failsafes on them to prevent them from crashing into gravity wells. Which makes sense from a design point of view. After all, we have ABS brakes, traction control, and many other things to keep us safer in a car, including a sensor that automatically brakes the car. A kill switch on a hyperdrive isn't all that different. The problem, though, is that Admiral Holdo didn't really seem like she had planned on pulling off this move. In the movie, it was more like a last-minute oh crap moment when she realized her plan wasn't working. And with a ship as large as the Mon Cala cruiser, the hyperdrive should be relatively complicated. It would probably take an entire engineering team a moderate amount of time to open up the hyperdrive and find the failsafe to disable. The other possibility is that the Mon Cala cruiser, which was converted from an underwater building, didn't have any failsafes on it, or the other option is that the hyperdrive failsafe could be turned off from the bridge. Although unlike ABS and traction control, let's say on a motorcycle, you really should never disable the failsafe on the hyperdrive unless you want to ram your ship, which is a suicidal tendency. So I don't understand why anyone would include that in the controls. It doesn't make any sense. If we look at the Millennium Falcon during The Force Awakens, it also seems like it doesn't have a failsafe, or at least we don't see Han and Chewie disable it. That's how the Millennium Falcon is able to jump through a planetary shield over Starkiller Base and almost slam into a mountain. If the failsafe had been working, they would have emerged out of hyperspace well before crashing through the planetary shield. So now we're presented with a clear problem in the franchise going forward. No matter how large the First Order fleet is, no matter how powerful the ships are, a few small hyperdrive-enabled frigates can easily take out their entire fleet. We could retcon the entire Star Wars saga and have Porkins engage the hyperdrive on his X-Wing and blast straight through the Death Star and then roll credits. Same thing with the second Death Star. Better yet, you didn't even need anyone piloting the thing. You could just use an astromech. While you're at it, why not just create a hyperdrive missile? It'll be a lot more expensive than a concussion or proton torpedo, but it'll do a lot more damage. This essentially provides everyone in Star Wars with a weapon that cannot be countered, and it levels the playing field, which kind of ruins the tension in space battles. Now, I've seen people talk about this issue in the comment section of other videos, and a lot of people say, well, why don't the First Order just surround their fleet with interdictor ships? Well, this will only work if the gravity generators on these interdictors have changed how they function. For instance, maybe the new gravity generators on these ships are so powerful they can literally pull ships out of hyperspace with gravity. But if it's based on the old system, which depends on the hyperdrive having a failsafe, then you're kind of out of luck if the failsafes don't exist anymore. Now, one way the First Order can counteract this is by developing some kind of countermeasure. After all, Holdo had not just rammed an ordinary ship, but the First Order's largest and most powerful ship, the Mega-class Star Dreadnought Supremacy. Now, one way to stop a hyperdrive crash is to use something in theory that's very similar to the active armor found on tanks here on Earth. When an enemy fighter fires an anti-tank missile at a tank with reactive armor, once the incoming round is detected, explosive panels will fire out at the missile and intercept it, preventing it from piercing the hull. It won't completely prevent the damage to the target, but what energy transference that gets through should be easily stopped with traditional armor plating. Aircraft carriers also have automated miniguns that are designed as a last line of defense against fast-moving missiles, aircraft, and even smaller attack boats. Now, one of the most difficult parts about making these types of systems work is having a sensor that can detect incoming attacks fast enough. This is hard enough when the incoming threat is a missile, but how about something traveling at FTL speeds? How can a computer sensor be fast enough to react to something like that? Well, we're in luck. Usually when a starship reverts back into real space from hyperspace, it emits something known as chrono radiation. This is how the Rebel base on Hoth detected the Imperial fleet before they entered real space. It gave them just enough time to evacuate most of their high command. This is also why Vader wanted Admiral Holdo to drop out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, and why he ultimately killed the Admiral. Now, using sensors that can detect chrono radiation, the First Order can then design missiles or projectiles that can travel in hyperspace and can destroy other hyperdrive-powered weapons, or at least knock them off course. These type of countermeasures would actually have to have some mass behind them in order to fully stop a projectile or at least alter their course. Because even though the Supremacy was the first ship hit by the Mon Cala cruiser Raddus, the debris from that collision took out several smaller Resurgent-class Star Destroyers. You need a lot of energy to counteract a hyperdrive missile. Another option would be a little bit more passive, and that would be for the First Order to extend the range of their deflector shields. Instead of having the shields hug the ship, they could extend them out several miles from the surface of the ship. This way, if a ship does try to ram you, hopefully the shield will take the first hit and then hopefully slow down the debris enough that when it hits the hull, it won't destroy your ship. Also, if it slows it down enough, you can even use your turbo lasers or point defense weapons to destroy these pieces of debris. The problem with this method would be that it would take a ridiculous amount of energy to create a shield bubble that big. It's very likely that the First Order fleet would have to adopt tighter formations and have specially created shield ships that could cover your entire fleet. On the reverse, they could also create smaller picket shields with shield generators that can sort of be like the first line of defense. The other option would be going in the complete opposite direction, break down the First Order fleet, and use powerful starfighters as the majority of your fleet, sort of like how the Rebel Alliance was structured. Starfighters and gunboats are much more agile and harder to hit, especially if you deploy them in a looser formation. Also, while trading a Mon Cala cruiser for a gigantic 60-kilometer wide Mega-class Star Dreadnought was worth it, trading an X-Wing for a TIE fighter definitely isn't for a resource-poor organization like the Resistance. Another thing the First Order could do is severely limit and regulate how hyperdrives are purchased and manufactured. They could make it very difficult for private citizens to buy hyperdrive-capable ships, or they could impose manufacturing standards which make it very hard to remove failsafes on hyperdrives. No matter what the case is, thanks to this one scene by Rian Johnson, all future Star Wars creators are going to be confronted with this problem, and they're probably going to have to address it unless they're very lazy, because this is a glaring problem. I mean, why won't all future Resistance fighters just hyperspace ram First Order ships? It doesn't matter how big the enemy ships are. Now, a lot of fans have looked at this scene in a very negative light because of the implications on future Star Wars combat, but I don't think it's necessarily a completely bad thing. Star Wars combat has always been visually exciting because it pays homage to World War I and World War II aerial combat when planes were still relatively primitive and engaged in line-of-sight dogfights. So we have these frantic battles in Star Wars where lasers are zipping across the screen and TIE fighters are exploding in balls of flame. A hyperdrive weapon would change this and indefinitely extend the range of these engagements and in a way make things more realistic and modern. Now, I'm not saying get rid of all the close quarter space combat because, you know, we all love that, but it would be actually pretty cool to see two capital ships exchange FTL weapons and countermeasures because, you know, the explosions from these collisions are going to be massive. I'd actually look forward to that if they do it. But yeah, I think it's definitely something that J.J. Abrams is going to have to address in Episode 9, or else every time the good guy faces something like this, or this, or this, or this, the audience will be thinking, why don't they just do this? So guys, those are some of the ideas I have about how we can deal with hyperspace ramming going forward. Obviously, you guys have your own opinions, and I'd love to hear them down in the comment section below because there are a lot more of you guys than there are of me, and I'm sure there's going to be some very intelligent solutions that we can share out there. Anyway, don't forget to subscribe, hit that notification button so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. My name's Alan, and thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.